Welcome to Cinema Rabbit Trails, episode 6. So, yeah. We watched The Conjuring 1 and 2 back to back.
We did have a short intermission, but yeah, one basically back to back.
Yeah, we had a pizza intermission, so.
We did it.
Yeah.
So.
Cool. So, David, why don't you give us a synopsis of the of both films?
Sure. So, the synopsis of the first film, we have Ed and Lorraine Warren. It's a married couple. This is all set in like the 70s, but it's a married couple who, they're not quite witch hunters or... How do they describe themselves?
Demonologists.
Demonologists.
Or wackos, as they are sometimes called.
Right.
As well,
so they definitely explore supernatural, demonic activities that occur, and so basically their job is to try to expel the evil forces in a particular location. So the first one, it takes place, I forget what the house is called, but they hear that they find out that there is a curse over this house, and we come to find out that there's been a witch who has cursed this house, and basically every family that's lived there ever since has died some horrible, tragic death or suicide. And so there's a lot,
or at least the mom and one of the kids has died.
Right, and so there's a lot of spiritual forces just darkening this entire place. There's a lot of demon possession going on, and with the daughter or this.
The mother in the first one.
The
mother was eventually became demon possessed in the first one.
Right. Mm-hmm. So that's the first one, and then the second one takes place in England, where very similar case where there's this older man who was living in this particular house this current family lives in now, and his spirit, along with some other forces, are taking over one of the younger daughters. And so the couple is called to this location, and it plays a lot into their own backstories as well, which we may or may not discuss in this podcast, but it's just pretty much those two instances where they're investigating. Anything else I'm missing?
No, I mean that's the breakdown of just the how the plot develops in both movies. Good thing to mention, especially on the second one, just to fill in the plot. I recommend you see them if you can withstand some scary movies. These are very different scary movies. There's no sexual content. There's very little any like violent blood content. There's definitely some violence as far as just some kind of gorish looks, the ghoulish looks and things like that, frightening images. But they're actually
being pulled around by invisible forces.
Yeah, exactly. But there's not. It's R-rated strictly for the scare factor, really. There's no other bad content other than the scare factors. That's really it, which is very unique, which makes it much more pleasant to watch, for one thing, and much more enjoyable to watch if you enjoy scary movies. But anyway,
and that's what's funny is I'm not a horror film kind of person, and Adam, I don't think you're.
Yeah, neither am I.
And
I'm the only one who might enjoy them.
Right, so it was your idea that put us up to watching, if not both films back to back. But I really enjoyed them. Actually, I was. Yeah. They're more. Good. They're not jump scares. They do jump out at you, but they were very well timed and placed to where it's.
Oh yeah, the cinematography was on point. All the time. It was beautifully done. I mean, I should say frighteningly done, I suppose, but that's what we want.
Frighteningly.
It's a beautiful nightmare.
Yes.
That's a good way of
beautiful
putting it.
Nightmare.
Right. So it really. Cool. You really get sucked into the story, and that's the whole goal of.
So, two things to mention real quick. The first movie, the mother eventually becomes demon possessed. This is what's interesting to me. Nobody in both films becomes demon possessed right off the bat. It's nothing like that. It's a slow progression. They follow a format. What was it? He wrote on the board, Ed Warren wrote on a classroom board in the first one. It was infestation. Then it was.
Infestation, oppression,
and then possession.
Possession, yes.
Yeah, so there's 3 stages. So infiltration is basically all the things that scare you early on in the films.
The whispers, the footsteps.
Yeah, the doors creaking, opening, slamming shut, all that stuff. If you watch the film, you'll get that. But then there's the oppression, which is where there's actually like physical harm. Nothing that can kill anybody, but it's just physical harm. The mom becomes bruised. People are thrown around rooms and moved around, things like that. Scrapes, cuts, bruises.
The crushing of their will.
Yes, exactly. So just driving them to a weaker and weaker state. And then finally possession of a single person where they, eventually the demon controls that person fully and takes over that person's entire persona. And so in the first one, the mother slowly becomes demon possessed. You actually see the moment she becomes possessed. Whenever she's so tired, she goes to sleep, and then next thing you know, you actually find her throwing up in the bathroom and walking out like everything's fine. She's like, "Oh no, I just felt sick." So you just see this persona switch from just insanely scared and sickly to, "Oh, I'm fine. It's all good." So very calm. You can just tell that there's a deceit there. There's something new in her. Very well done. But so the plot of the first one, they eventually find out the mom is possessed in order to kill the child and then kill herself. That's the plot device that the demon has repeatedly used on this property.
Right.
Second one, it's funny because it's actually more like the demon possesses. It takes control of. It kind of creates a ghost out of the history of this old man, and takes over the spirit of the old man. I'm actually questioning if that was actually a spirit of the old man or if it was actually just the demon just putting on a persona to actually fool everybody. But regardless,
it sounded like it was actually the old man because the old man was giving clues.
That's true.
Yeah.
And at the end, those clues reveal the name of the
That's
of
true.
this demon.
And he was kind of he was afraid too of the thing.
You're right. Yeah.
Yeah,
So that
was
would.
haunting
Yeah,
him.
you're right. So yeah, in the second one, the demon possesses the girl to supposedly kill the family, but the demon actually locks the family out. It's like the demon changes its mission, and is using this whole scenario to get Lorraine Warren and Ed Warren. Like that's who the demon in the end really wants to get, as well as the girl that the demon also possesses. But
Sure.
But very interesting. The second one especially is much more mysterious, and there's actually demon detective work going on, which is very unique for a film. And probably my favorite thing about these films is that there are moments of victory. You don't get that in horror movies really ever. You get this great thrill of both family moments. You get sweet, sweet family moments that are just almost make you cry at times. Just oh, this is so beautiful. This is a welcome relief, and you just see the joy on people's faces and the family's faces getting to feel like a family again. And then in the end, you get these beautiful reuniting feeling of the family and friends, and people have actually won, and nobody has actually died. That's one thing I love about both movies. Nobody dies. Spoiler alert, nobody dies in either film except first one, we have the dog. Dog dies in the first one. That's it.
Oh, yeah.
That is the only emotionally attached character, if you even want to call the dog a character, that we actually see die.
Right.
Some leaves are crunched in the film too.
Say what?
The leaves are crunched in the film too.
Okay. Oh, and the birds fly into the windows.
The birds fly.
Yeah. But yeah, no humans.
I was thinking of Alfred Hitchcock the whole time with birds flying through the windows and whatnot. So
very Hitchcock.
I wanted to see them say no birds were harmed in the making of this film. Because you see birds with broken necks because they're flying through glass and whatnot. But
Just kidding.
But
anyway,
so have we talked about Lorraine too and her abilities?
We haven't. No.
Okay.
That's good thought. We need to mention
because
that.
it might be worth mentioning the different gifts, I suppose, that each of them had, Ed and Lorraine, because Lorraine had an experience during I think it was an exorcism. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
And this demon possessed person grabbed her, and she saw her she saw a vision of some kind that was terrifying, and I'm not sure if we actually find out.
Yeah, we find out because it was the vision of her husband dying.
That was the second time, though.
No, that was the first one. She had it again, though. She had the same
did?
vision again.
Oh, I didn't know.
Yeah,
that.
and this time she actually saw the demon's face. And then she finds out that Ed actually had a dream of the demon, not necessarily a dream of him dying, but just a dream where the demon appeared, and he's he couldn't get it out of his head, so he painted it.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
I thought, in the first one I must have missed that then.
I think
the first one doesn't show it.
They just
they just mention it.
Yeah, they just mention it, which is kind of actually neat that the story is that well constructed that they play into each other without necessarily needing to be a part of one another.
Correct.
Like,
Yeah,
like
they are
that.
standalone, but they connect really well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so she gains this clairvoyance, this power beyond this world. She can see visions and other things like that. So that's her ability. And then her husband is really just he's simply a demon hunter, you might say, right? Because he's a demonologist, but he doesn't really have any special abilities in terms of how to track him down. He's simply
True.
a demon hunter.
But he's definitely the support for Lorraine. Like they would not. You
Yes.
see, that's one of the
Yeah.
another great thing I love about the film. They are so like they are the perfect supportive couple. Like they don't have a bad moment together, and
Well,
they have
Yeah, the
they face
dynamic.
those really difficult moments, but I love that the theme of the family theme there that they have, where I think that's just human, where we go throughout life and we feel different and ostracized from other people. We find those certain people that like, wow, I don't feel like a freak. I feel normal around this kind of person, and I love that as they're trying to comfort in the second movie, as they're trying to comfort the little girl. What did he say to her? She's trying to comfort her, saying like, "Hey, I know what you're going through. I know it's like to lose all your friends because of this bizarre experience, but I found someone who understood me, and you know what I did?" And she's like, "What?" And he's like, "I married him."
yeah.
And then later in the movie, when she's talking with Ed, he's like, just I finally found someone who got me, and you know what I did? And he's like, "You married her."
It's like,
And
you've
she's-
heard the story
You've
before.
heard the story before.
Mhm.
So I think that's very sweet.
Yeah.
Not just from a definitely a husband and wife romantic relationship, but just good friends in general. I mean, we definitely have great conversations even when we're not doing this podcast. So it's
Yeah,
Mhm.
doesn't have to be official.
yeah.
So.
So friendship is a good thing.
Yeah, definitely. And even, I mean, just as far as actors themselves, they had probably some of the greatest chemistry I've ever seen on a screen. Like,
Yeah.
it was so natural. And one thing I loved about Lorraine, I mentioned this to you while we were watching it. Lorraine is probably one of the most beautiful characters to ever exist on screen, in my opinion. And I don't mean beautiful, like, strictly physically. I mean, she is an attractive woman, but she's not, like, they didn't pick, like, somebody who's renowned as like one of the hottest actresses ever. But she is just this joyful, like, even despite all this terror stuff going on, she's just one of the most joyful people to ever see on a TV screen in anything as a character.
She just kind of brings life into the room. when
She
walks
really
in.
does, and it's almost ironic that she does, considering that she has the ability to see all this death around her in these situations. Now that's just happens to be the circumstances she's in, because she's almost empathic in that she can touch somebody and feel their emotions. You see that a couple points in the film.
Yeah.
She is, yeah.
Yeah, but most of the time you see her get the feeling throughout a room or from touching somebody or a circumstance. She gets a negative response from whatever she just touched, a negative empathy. But she's still just this amazingly joyful person.
Yeah.
And I think that's definitely something that could be said about, I mean, a true Christian. Not that we can't be sad and distraught and fearful at any time, but we can definitely, it's that peace that surpasses all understanding. And I think you can exchange the word peace for joy, and joy doesn't always necessarily mean, oh, yay, I'm all happy all the time. It definitely doesn't mean that, but there's just an internal joy and satisfaction in every moment.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
So I love Lorraine Warren. She's just just so enjoyable to watch. I love her as a character.
Yeah.
So
But yeah, they do have great chemistry, so I definitely would second that for sure.
what was it they said in the first film? It was like, do you remember what you said to me when the
'Cause
night we got
they
married?
kind of set all that up. They're having this
Yeah.
serious moment about like she's concerned about like they're gonna he might die, or it's some dangerous work, and
Yeah.
and she's like, "Do you remember what you first said to me when like?"
On our wedding night,
And then he says,
can we do it again? She's like,
"No, after that." And she says, "I believe God brought us together for a reason."
yeah,
And so definitely, I love that whole playful banner there.
yeah.
And
That flirting even after years of marriage was
yeah.
great.
Oh yeah, it's so funny.
Mhm.
And the second one, there's that scene where they're in a flat in England, and so like the beds are separate, so they're kind of opposite sides of the room. He says, "I don't know if I can sleep with you this far away from me." And she just looks at him and says, "Well, when we get back home, you have something to look forward to." So we're like, enough
Yeah.
said.
Mm.
That's what I liked about the second one, is that it was lighter but also heavier.
Hmm.
It seemed to balance out those moments better
Yeah.
between the light and dark.
It was
True.
very extreme on both sides. Yeah.
Mhm.
And I'm because we Adam and I had a conversation between the films while David was going to get the pizza about marriage and relationships and things like that.
Because we try and talk about those things when he's not here.
You're right.
The important things, the valuable things.
Right.
Anyway.
uh, but yeah, I loved how whenever Ed Warren is singing to the kids in the second one, you can just see
Elvis
her.
Presley.
Yeah, he was
did a really
singing
nice-
Elvis Presley.
He did a really nice job.
He did. He's actually a really good singer. But
Can't Help Falling in Love. That was the song.
yeah.
that's
But
right.
I can't help. So, I love the song.
We'll be having an album of Jerry doing "Falling in Love" later after.
Yeah,
the
it'll
podcast.
just be on a constant loop for an hour. So,
Fall in love with Jerry. Andrews.
but yeah, the you can just see her. She's there in the corner. She kind of starts tearing up while he's singing to the children. She's just like, you could just kind of read on her face, just like
I love this man.
Exactly. Yes. Just like I could not have married a better person. Just like
Right.
this hugely warm feeling there for everybody in the room at that point. But just especially her reaction is my favorite. In that point, just the satisfaction of just like this man comforts me, but also the fear you also see because she's had these visions of him dying, and so that's what she's trying to avoid the entire second film. So just a lot of mixed emotions there, but still just like one of the most very, very beautiful moment.
Agreed.
But yeah, Adam and I were talking earlier while you were out for pizza, David, and one of the things I mentioned was because they're kind of a fairly young couple in both films, and they have about a 10-year-old daughter or so. So you can assume they got married somewhat young, like
probably maybe
mid 20s, kind of average time frame to get married, but. One thing that Adam and I were discussing is that I have a huge desire to, early on in my life, if possible, if God wills, to be a husband and a father very early on. That's just a big desire for me. I understand that's not the case for everybody. But what weirds me out is that I get reactions from people whenever I say that, and for some reason, especially women, not necessarily of a specific age group, but I've gotten surprised looks and questions whenever I say that, just like, you're what, 22, 23, and you're like you want kids and a wife, like at this point in your life, like this is the time you're supposed to just be having fun being single. I'm like, no, I mean, I'm just that's just something I've wanted, but why is that weird that a man my age would actually want that? That's just I feel like that's just something we've lost in our cultures. Like like 30 is whenever you're supposed to actually start thinking about these things.
Like as if marriage is what we do when the best years of our life are over.
Basically, yeah. And I mean, I know everybody doesn't think that way, but still, it's just like the fact that people are surprised when someone at my age thinks that way. That's a little sad to me, honestly. That's just something lost in our culture there.
It could just be a sense that we don't expect much if people are late teens, especially teenagers. I mean, what was it? Teenagers wasn't a term even invented before the 1940s. And so definitely after you were a child, you became a young adult. And so there was that responsibility placed on you. And so it's kind of sad that we don't expect younger people and people our age to do more. And therefore, if we don't have that expectation on us, and I understand they're like, we don't want to accept, like, you have to, high expectations, but at least some level of responsibility. We're not going to strive to achieve that.
Yeah.
If you set low expectations, we will more than gladly meet those if that's all that's expected of us.
Yeah. Very true. I find it funny that, a couple 100,000 years ago, we would have, like 14, 15-year-olds like, all right, I'm gonna pair you up with the neighbor's daughter. It's about time you guys get married, so you're gonna go and build your own house down the road here. It's like, all right, Dad, I'm ready. It's just like that was expected. It's like,
right.
Man, we've just lost so much. Like the age of responsibility has just gotten longer and longer down the road.
Mm-hmm.
So as far as age, so definitely kind of disappointing, but the world we live in.
Yeah. Any other themes that stuck out to you guys? I have one that I definitely want to talk about. Want to hear? What you
Shoot.
guys-
Yeah, go ahead.
I definitely wanted to talk about this idea of, how did I put it, inviting evil in, because in the first one, it's kind of not their fault. Like, they move into this house, and the house is haunted. And so, basically, this evil spirit attaches itself to them. So they really weren't asking for it. It just kind of was the nature of the situation. The second one, however, the girl, she's wanting to look cool and fit in with her friend, and so she's caught holding a cigarette, and she's like, oh, hey, here's the Ouija board that we worked on the other day. And so she takes this Ouija board home, and she's playing it with her sister, and nothing happens when she's like, is there a spirit here? And then she even asks the question, like, is Dad going to come back? Yeah. And then that was just a real human moment, how in the midst of all of this stuff. We're just asking basic questions about her humanity. But nothing happens with the Ouija board, but then she puts it underneath her bed. And that's kind of like the invitation for evil to come in. So
Yeah.
Definitely, what was like y'all's impression of all that?
I mean, I think that's a big danger. I mean, well, Adam, do you have a thought?
No, I was just wondering if the Ouija board was actually the cause of that, or if it was just merely a device for you to think that it was involved.
Well, I think it was definitely an opening that was taken by the demonic presence, just because, I mean, Ed Warren even explains later, just like, you know, when he finds out that the dad, like, recently left, like, when we are introduced to the family, like, kind of get the impression later on that it had been, like, weeks, maybe a month or two since the father left. So it was still very vulnerable time. It was still very fresh.
He took the music from the house. Oh, I know what you're saying. He just took all the life. And no. He took all the music. Like, he took all the records. Elvis Presley. He took all the music.
Yeah, that was great.
I thought it was a good, oh gosh, I forget.
Segue or moment.
Well, just a good joke moment. A beat. Thank you. Just a good beat. Just out of this intense moment, just be like, no, he took all the music with him.
Yeah,
But,
literally the music.
Misinterpretation, yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, yeah, just how Ed Warren was talking about how demonic spirits like to kick us when we're down. And then, of course, another kind of good beat was, it's like, well, that doesn't quite seem fair. It's like, no, it doesn't.
Nope.
But yeah, I mean, that would make sense. So, I mean, again, that's the daughter is the one who gets possessed, and that's a very weak moment for her is when she's using the Ouija board.
True.
Yeah, so I get the impression that's when the demon kind of got invited and became present, because you also think all of it started at her bed. That's where it started. So where the Ouija board was. So
now we could talk more about other certain scenes that we'd enjoyed and things like that, but also how would you say this differentiates, or how is this different than other horror movies? Would you say is there something specific that you point out?
It very much follows what we know biblically of demons. They're not allowed to kill just like randomly. Like they're just not allowed to. They have to be invited. And that's what we see in both films. They kind of, to some degree, are invited. Although second one, not so much. It's been more of a repetitive thing. So I'd have to think more on the first one. But second one, definitely more of an invitation. What was it? The other thing is that there's very, very little language. They kind of play at it in a jokeful sense a couple of times, but overall there's maybe 3 or 4 minor swear words in both movies, which is completely unusual, very, very unusual. There's also no sexual content in any explicit way. I mean, the husband and wife in the first one, they suggested that they have relations after.
Relations.
Yeah, I'm just going to stick to that word in a video, in a public video.
Even
but
that, it
they
was
have,
just like it was a zoom out of the window, and there was
there was nothing shown. It was just like how the wife just asked, like, "You two puckered to christen the new house?" She's like, "I'm not tired."
He knew her biblically, yes.
They had sex. Okay.
Yes. Why are we jumping around this? This is actually embarrassing that we're jumping around this.
Right.
Why do we feel bad about saying that word? I guess that's weird. Anyway,
we're just trying to be creative in our terminology.
I guess so.
Yeah.
We're so intellectual. We go beyond the basic terms.
That's right.
Right.
Anyway, but yeah, second one even. I mean, they talk about it and it's referenced as if the husband and wife have sex on a regular basis and things like that. Or but nothing's actually, the first one has the closest to any sort of reference to it, because you actually know they have sex as a married couple whenever the shot goes away. But second one, they only just like talk about it very, very briefly. And that's really just Ed and Lorraine Warren, just like really have something to look forward to when we get back home.
That's the interesting thing about the film presents that as is it doesn't present it as like a kind of a taboo thing. It's just like, this is what they do.
Yeah.
But it was in such a way that it really edified the relationship. It wasn't just this like,
It wasn't a lustful moment. It was
just like, well, of course,
it was love. It was a loving moment.
They love one another. Yeah. They're side by side. They got each other's backs. They're very close, and so definitely, it's like this is just Yeah,
Yeah,
so it
and
was
both
just
moments were in marriage. It wasn't outside of marriage, which was also a very unique thing. Of course, they're also you might just have to give them credit that they're just being honest to the story, because both movies are actually based off the Warrens' personal diaries and tapes. I should have said that earlier. These are based off the Warrens are real people. I think they're still alive today. They're definitely somewhat older, but
that happens
yeah, it does.
with time.
Sadly, yeah. Anyway,
Real quick, actually, I think it'd be important to
go ahead.
Adam. We were talking about how did you put it? I think it'd be good to clarify define our terms, what we mean by paranormal activity and what did you say, demonic activity?
Well, more of like initially it was just the idea of the spiritual and supernatural. I think I might point more to mysticism rather. So mysticism and the spiritual, and how you might differentiate that. Now, mysticism, you do have spiritual as a synonym for mysticism, but there are ways in which they are different. And so, for example, mysticism, think of it in the terms today. Would you call New Age more of a mysticism?
I would probably call that more of a mysticism.
Yeah. In terms of finding it, because it was talking about, what was it, a union with a deity? Or at least the understanding of God. And so today we have a lot of ways in which people are choosing their faiths. They're choosing what they wish to combine with their different religions, I think, and then just how that and essentially the supernatural works. How would you differentiate that? Because there are those who walk in it not necessarily looking for a spiritual theme or a spiritual purpose, maybe even like we do, because we're believers and Christians.
So we kind of look for it.
We look for those things, but there's those who simply walking into it looking for some supernatural experience, something that might excite them, or think of some unknown entities out there.
Gotcha. Okay. I mean, as far as just like you're just speaking to the thrill of the film, you're saying, or
yeah, just that general interest in spiritual things. That makes sense. I don't want to confuse the terms. I'm thinking in terms of supernatural. I'm just
more
thinking
paranormal.
Beyond. Yeah.
Yeah. So just the people who just what's basically you're asking what's good about the film when it comes to just seeking out supernatural or paranormal excitement.
Yeah, because there's an audience for that, essentially.
Definitely, yeah.
So that was a long way around, but yes.
Okay, yes. Sorry, there was a big rabbit trail that came back to the right spot. All right,
Edits.
cool. Yeah, we'll cut that later. As far as just for people who are not caring about the spirituality and the very Catholic or Christian themes throughout the film, I mean, it's just a thrilling film. I mean, there's a lot of mystery to it, more that you're surprised at. Whereas like other films is just like, are they going to make it? Or what's going to happen next? Where am I going to get scared next? What's about to happen? Who's about to die? This is definitely more of like, what's going on? What's the purpose here? What are we trying to figure out? I mean, on top of being just scared out of your wits, I mean, I was the first times I watched these films and the second time. This time I was like, I knew everything that was going to happen, so I was okay. But yeah, I mean, they're definitely some of those frightening films that I think I've ever seen. The music definitely adds to the scare factor. Very well done there, I thought. And it was kind of very old school horror film, but definitely with a modern element, but still very, very good. Very gritty. But it's funny to me how these films got so popular. Like they're some of the highest rated horror films. The first one has like an 83% by actual like critics, like not the reviewers. The reviews are high, but the critics rate it I think like 83%. The second one was like at 79%. That's very, very high for any movie, but especially for horror movies. Most horror movies are lucky if they get over 50%. And so, like, if I'm looking at watching a horror movie and I'm looking at the reviews on Rotten Tomatoes, if it hits like above 40%, I'm probably going to watch it because that means it's probably pretty good. But I mean, again, depending on what it is. But these movies are very, very highly rated. So, I mean, the critics and the reviewers absolutely love them. Huge scare factor. And it's just funny to me how it turns out that you don't need all that crap that's in most horror films to actually make it good. And sometimes that probably makes it better because it also expands your audience. Because people who are going to these movies to look for a scare factor, that's why they're going, to look for a scare factor. Sure, you can talk about how, like, sex sells, and pretty much everybody uses language, so they don't really care, or at least around it, so they don't care. It's like, well, while that's true, that might be true for like action and comedy movies. That could maybe help upsell it in some ways, depending on what you're doing. That can vary. But when it comes to horror movies, people are there for the scare factor. And these movies focus on that and building it slowly. They're very patient with it. Or at least in the actually, the first one, they're very patient with. The second one, they kind of start it right off the bat, and it goes beyond what we're used to. It's funny to me how if you start from a point, like the second one, they're not trying to recreate what they originally did. That's where a lot of sequels fall short, especially in horror movies. I mean, I've watched the first 4 Friday the 13th movies. They're basically copy and pastes of what the scares are. And they're riddled with a lot of indecency throughout the film, or all 4 films and the latter ones. But this has basically no indecency in it. They are both R-rated if you kind of go after. I mean, most horror films are, just because of the graphics of it. Yeah, the scare factor and the graphics of it. But yeah, I mean, it's just funny to me how you actually enlarge your audience when you cut a lot of that indecent stuff out of there. You will broaden your audience, because the people who go to movies, unless it's a movie that's like, what was it? The 50 Shades of Grey. I couldn't think of it. Like, that's obviously a movie where sex is there to sell it. That's obviously there for that reason. Maybe you could even say something like Wolf of Wall Street was the same way. And I'm sure there's other popular movies that you could say that's the case. I mean, James Bond, you could even say. I mean, the girls are there in the intro and throughout the film. And James Bond usually doesn't get super graphic on it anyway. But still, it's there because that's part of the character. That's part of what sells the character. But horror films, a lot of action movies, a lot of comedies, if you just keep it funny, keep it really cool to watch, like Avengers and Marvel is doing. I mean, there's not a sexual factor really in any of the Marvel movies, and they're the highest grossing series of films we've ever had. And Conjuring is another example. No indecency, focus on good storytelling, good builds, patient processes, and good cinematography, great soundtrack, good scares. It's a win.
Yeah.
So
sometimes that's an excuse for laziness. Like taking a Pelham 1, 2, 3. It's an interesting movie with Denzel Washington and I'm forgetting the other actor's name, but they drop the F-bomb like literally, in one sentence, maybe about six different times, and it's like, okay, buddy, I'm getting it, but you got anything more creative in your vocabulary? Like, we get that you're frustrated, but at some point it just is like, okay, this is not, badassery here. This is just irritating laziness, because apparently the writers couldn't think of anything else to write. So
yeah, true.
Sometimes it is an excuse. So I feel like if you're going to make a film, that you're really trying to convey some serious ideas about your film.
Yeah.
And you're going to try to avoid the sex and avoid the language. You really have to work a lot harder, because it's like, okay, what are we going to present that's actually going to be a good film?
Yeah.
So you really have to strive.
Well, and that's how I feel about comedians, because jokes about sex and having a lot of language in your comedy, it's very, very easy to do, and I feel like it's lazy work.
It's still not easy.
Yeah, it's still not easy.
But,
Sorry,
but,
I don't mean to imply it
no,
harshly. I shouldn't have said it that way. But, I mean, the comedians I see who use less language and actually observe just everyday life and find the funny in it, those are the funniest people. Or tell their own stories that are just really funny. But like I watched, I think Aziz Ansari, his comedy special. I couldn't laugh at anything because it was all about sex and there was a lot of language. It was just like, that's not very funny. I mean, there were parts where I even kind of felt a little bit guilty about laughing at every now and then. But overall, just like I wasn't dying laughing. I didn't find it hilarious. It was more offensive to me. And so you've cut off me as an audience member. So not that obviously I'm not a huge audience, but still, the fact that if you could at least cut out the language aspect, you would have increased your audience. If you had gone into talk about more topics than sex as your jokes, then you've increased your audience even more. So guys like Tim Hawkins make a lot of money because he's very clean. Even somebody like Gabriel Iglesias, he does make jokes about sex. He does make jokes with language in them, but he's not like throwing out language all the time. He's using a lot of stories. Most of his jokes are more about like his family, his son, just like his friends, and times he's at even other shows and things that have happened to him throughout his life. It's just like it's very relatable stories that you get to laugh at, and all that just to relate back to all these films that we've been talking about. It's just if you take out the part that's easy that's easy to use as fillers, which is language and sex, very easy to use as fillers throughout films and TV shows. If you take those out of there, even if you intend to have that as part of your show or even as part of your character, like one of your characters just like a playboy who cusses a lot, if that's going to be one of your characters and that's just the type you want him at, you could even take those factors out of him for a little bit. Just like in your writing process, take that out of him, make the character how you want him to be without that as a filler, and you'll have a much richer character. And then if that's just who you want him to be, you can throw that in afterward, but you've built a character without the filler first.
Right, so
and then you can throw that in.
It's not just a plot device.
Exactly, yeah, because it becomes a cliche.
Right.
And
it's not always used just as a plot device, though.
True.
I mean sometimes
yeah.
it is the center of the joke.
True,
You know what
yeah.
I mean?
Yeah,
Even,
I definitely don't mean 100%
for
of the
example,
time.
One of the examples, I haven't actually kept up with the show, but do you know The Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt? I think that's what it's called.
I watched that for a couple of
Yeah.
seasons.
But it's funny because there's the homosexual guy, and he's actually funny in terms of just like actually his personality and the way they depict him. It's actually really funny with who he is.
Yeah.
And so in that case, I'm personally not condoning the homosexuality because through my Christian view, of course that can be discussed later on.
Yeah, we can discuss that
But
later.
essentially,
yeah.
there was something within his character. It may not have been directly the homosexuality, but just the fact that he was that character.
Yeah.
Gave him, just more color.
He did. He had a lot.
You could think of the Hot Fuzz.
Yeah.
Some of those films with Simon Pegg and things like that, to where there were definitely some crude moments, but there was definitely that sense where the humor was carried through, despite that content being almost at the center of it sometimes.
Well, and I loved The Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt for the first couple of seasons. The latest one, I think it's the latest one. They might have come up with another one since I last kept up with it, but they kind of got too comfortable with the characters and their typecasts and just who they developed into, and it got a lot more coarse than I was comfortable with in that show. But first, like 2 seasons, maybe the third, I can't remember how many there were, but first 2 or 3 seasons were hilarious. I loved them. Very few moments where I just kind of felt like, okay, but just felt uncomfortable. But yeah, you're right. I mean, lots of color to those characters early on, a lot of development, and yes, they did use that as not just a plot, those moments and things as plot devices. They actually incorporated them in a very meaningful way, I would say, as far as incorporating them into the story goes. But eventually it kind of did go too far.
Yeah, and also going to the content of the Conjuring, I liked its simplicity in terms of the script it wasn't too complex. There was actually some pretty simple dialogue between the characters.
Yeah, you're right.
But it felt natural. Felt like the dialogue, especially between Lorraine and Ed, felt very natural because of their dynamic also. But overall, that was very good. Also, the films were all in one location. They were all in one spot. And so you really had the chance to actually go in depth with what was happening.
Yeah.
Instead of something so grand that it took away from the narrative. It didn't stretch it thin. It kept it very focused.
Yeah, which is hard to do.
It is. So you had the demonic activity, you had the exorcism. These things were very focused in. And so it was refreshing. I hadn't really seen a movie that was so focused in like that in a while. So it really felt nice. You almost felt like a part of them.
It felt so relatable, I think, is probably what we're
you
driving
almost
at, because
felt like you're part of their family.
Because you kind of can grasp, like, this is a house, this is what the yard probably looks like. I was actually very impressed with the cinematography of this film, just because the Dutch angles that they chose to do there, or the camera on a wire going through the windows we talked about. You really got a good sense in this film of where things were at. Like, he walks, you could see that the spirit's on the left side here, and so when he's kind of blinded, he walks past that side, and so he looks to his right, and you're like, okay, if he keeps looking to the left, I know there ought to be something there.
Yeah.
And it's not. And so that kind of makes you uneasy. And so they did a fantastic job with you just knowing where things are at, because a lot of horror films, it's so chaotic and jump scares and dark shadows that you're kind of so disoriented, you don't know what to be afraid of, so you're just kind of uneased just by the chaos.
Yeah, well, and they used a couple of different filming styles too. Even like you had the basic kind of like third person shots multiple times in the scare moments. You had a couple of first person ones. Those showed up more, I think, in the second one. Yeah, that was really good. Plenty of perspective, great use of shadows all the time. That was very, very well done. Light and shadows, I should say, both. But yeah, it was even just like the close face up shots. I mean, there were very good acting on everybody's part. They picked some very great actors and actresses for both films, where you got the intensity of every single moment on every person's face, even the kids, which was I always find kid actors more impressive than adult actors because they have less experience to draw from, and when they can pull off parts like that, that's very, very impressive.
Yeah. The demon possession, that was interesting. Do you guys want to talk a little more about that?
I do,
especially considering the ones who were possessed, and it actually speaks to their current lifestyle. And even the first one said, "Oh, we're not church-going people,
right?
Or we don't engage in a religious lifestyle."
Right. I really want to go kind of. This touches back. What I brought up earlier was talking about the inviting evil in, because what I wanted to kind of. My question would have been like, well, why did the mother get possessed? Well, why did the little girl get possessed? My question would be like, well, what were you doing prior to that? Because as we talked about, like the whole demonic infestation, oppression, and possession is not just bam, you're demon possessed. It's a gradual progression there. So I would have been curious, like, what's kind of lifestyle is the mother living? Because the thing I really think is important that's relevant to our lives now is, what are you doing with your time? Are you inviting evil in? And it doesn't have to be a Ouija board. Like, that's a very tangible thing of like, well, yeah. And there's really nothing objectively demonic about it. It's just the board and the things they're making. But I think something that's very prominent in our culture is pornography, and how that is something that can be it's an invitation. I mean, if Satan's going to get into your heart, a Ouija board or deck of cards or pornography, pick your vice. And so I think it's like, what are you spending your time doing? Because that's creating an avenue for those kind of forces to work in there.
Yeah.
Because soon you'll be lying to cover up, what you're doing. You're being deceitful to other people, and it's just, you're inviting that kind of evil in. And obviously, when you're inviting evil in, you want nothing to do with. You can't recognize goodness when you see it.
Yep.
And so therefore, it takes over you. So I can see in our own lives, like, what are you spending your time doing? So I'm curious, like, what was the mother doing? The girl, we can see with her, she was playing with a Ouija board and they're consulting these spirits.
Yeah, much more obvious, but
that was the invitation. So
you could say that porn is that door that we all know that the person in the film shouldn't open, but once they do, all this stuff goes down and gets all crazy and messed up, and then it takes a very painful process to get rid of it.
Yeah, very
very ominous metaphor.
Yeah, but it's kind of, we're talking about, from a Christian perspective, like, people always ask this question, like, not always, people ask this question, can a Christian be demon possessed? And I would say no.
Yeah.
Because Christians have this audacious idea that the God of the universe lives inside of us. Jesus said, remain in me and I will remain with you. I'm with you always, even to the end of the age. And this idea that this is not my temple. This is God's temple, and I use it for his purposes. And he's the one who's indwelling me to, do what he's called me to do, and to love people unconditionally, and to do all these things. So if Christ is in me, there's no way any demon can take over that house, because this is his house. But if you don't have Christ, it's just you, then any demon knocking on that door is going to have a lot of influence and sway. And that's why, they kept saying, don't give in to it. Whatever, the demon's compelling you to do, just don't give in to it. But
yeah.
Yeah, Also,
I went really deep there, but
No,
I
that's
thought
good.
it was
That's why we're here.
yeah, I think that was just it's very important because usually we think like, oh, I'm not going to get involved in witchcraft or anything like that or something really really serious. But again, even witchcraft, that is it's a form of pride, where it's like I want to control my own destiny and I'm going to use whatever means are at my disposal. And we all have pride. We all want things our way. We all think it's mine and I want ownership of it. And I think witchcraft just seems it's another extension, a more powerful extension of that. And of course, by opening that door, you're letting Satan like, okay, you want to run your show? Great, I'll help you run your own show.
Yeah.
And that's the whole point where it gets to the point where it's no longer your show as you think it is. It's now Satan's show, and now you're just a puppet, and you can't get out of it.
Yep.
yeah, and notice this film did not condone the evil, for example, because there are things that we do that we might not think are bad for us in the moment, but they end up reaping consequences later on.
Proverbs 16 talks about saying how does it go? Like all of a man's ways are pure in his own eyes, but the Lord weighs the spirit. So really, that's the problem is we're
Right.
judging good and evil by our own standard, and we see all the trouble we get into as a result.
Yeah. I mean, even Hitler thought that he was doing the right thing.
Right.
Right. So but in this film, there was a distinct ground with evil.
Yeah.
There's like the flag planted there. This is evil, and needs to be driven out of the person. So there was a clear distinction here of what that was.
Yeah, I think at the very worst, we as humans, as faulty humans, think that the thing we did that might have been wrong was excusable because of I had a bad day, I've had this problem, or this is just who I am. Like that's as bad as it gets in our own heads as far as like why we do something wrong.
We rationalize.
Yeah, if we can't think, if we don't think if we know it's not good, we make an excuse for it to make ourselves think that we're still okay.
You
but
could
that's
say it's almost like the rational explanations they made for the demon possession, remember, or the infestation.
Yeah.
Of them being like, oh, that table moved or something. Oh, the draft of wind, open the door.
Right.
or
All the
things like
clocks
that.
stopped at the same moment. It's like, oh,
And they don't
coincidence?
actually recognize what was happening behind the scenes.
Yeah.
So
true.
again, going to your point.
But yeah, I mean, then play that into just Christianity. What makes it different is that it's about recognizing that we're faulty. It's acknowledging the guilt and growing our conscience to be more aware of what we're doing wrong, and be remorseful and ask for forgiveness. That's another thing that I find.
It's a surrendering of the will.
It is.
That's the irony of it. It's not doing better. It's like I can't do better.
Yeah.
You take over.
Yeah, you can't really win against the God who created the entire universe and yourself. It's like you can't beat that.
Yeah.
So surrender to it. That's kind of the idea.
But you can't beat Satan either, and that's
True.
That's the idea. Is we like to think
We're helpless.
Well, that's the idea. It's like we think we can battle Satan. It's like
Yeah.
you're on a disadvantage here. Your own flesh and body are corrupt.
Yeah.
And we talk about not wanting to have the sex and the language in the movies. It's not because we don't think that sex is a bad thing. It's that we recognize that it's a powerful tool that God's created for some great things, and yet it is a powerful tool that has unleashed such great destruction on people with relationships, with sexually transmitted diseases, and emotional dysfunctions, and now relationships. I mean,
Yeah.
we don't know how to have good, healthy relationships with people of the opposite sex, let alone our future spouses, because we have all this extra baggage to carry.
Yeah.
I mean, we see all that in Hollywood, where it's like we see all the fun stuff, but they don't show you all the bad stuff, because if you did see the bad stuff, you're like, maybe this isn't the way to go about it.
Yeah.
It's
true. I mean, how many of our largest celebrities we ever had have committed suicide? We've had a lot. We've had a lot of our biggest stars in history commit suicide.
Yeah.
There's a lot that goes on behind the scenes
and it's not,
not
just
worth being
sexual,
jealous over.
And it's not just sexual stuff.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah. No. It's a lot of other stuff, but I mean that's part of it.
Yeah. People are hurting.
Yeah.
And this does not help in aiding any of that.
Yeah. And one good thing you can always do to try to pinpoint what might actually be causing you pain and distorting a lot of your happiness, even if you're not a Christian, is what are you pursuing to make you happy?
Mm-hmm.
And then what what do you think you have let go that might have made you joyful?
It's a good reflection on your
Those
life.
two questions might reverse your entire worldview right there.
Where are you going, and where have you come from?
Yep. So, well, any last points? We've got about 3-4 minutes left. Any final thoughts?
I love the British accents in the second one.
Oh yes, the British accents are quite stellar, quite fantastic.
We were joking that it's a shame that Hermione wasn't in there to help get rid of the demons there.
It was a Dementor.
Something like that.
Oh man.
Yeah, I can't come up with a cohesive thing to say.
Yeah. Well,
Figure-
I guess
build
we're
this
wrapping
out.
it up then.
Yeah.
I'm
But-
trying to think of something. I really am, but it's not.
I mean, they're great movies. There's more I'm sure we could talk about, but probably some of the most lovable characters you'll ever meet in any sort of horror movie. Definitely some of the most organically written dialogue in any horror movie I've ever seen.
Well, actually, I'll just make one quick thought. Like
Go.
that story, but a good story. But I feel like they did a good job with. There's no like, well, why didn't they just do X, Y, or Z? Like, I feel like they really try to do a good job with tying up the loose ends. It's like, well, we're haunted. Why don't we just move? Like, I was just
there's a reason.
I
they
was
say
just
that.
thinking that question. They made a good point, saying, hey, when the spirit finds you, it latches onto you. So even if you move, it's gonna probably move with you. And
Yeah.
that's a good metaphor for our lives when we have baggage we're carrying around. If you don't like the job you're working at and you think, oh, my boss is a jerk, you go to your next job and you're like, hey, my boss is a jerk here too. There might be something, you might be the problem in the situation. You just don't know it. So, so they did a really good job with making the story believable and relatable. So, but definitely some good themes regarding family. And I guess that would be a good note to wrap up on. It was after this entire experience where it's just like, this is really basically hell on earth almost.
Yeah.
There's this reuniting of the family there, where the families are they have their problems, they move, there's dysfunction, but at the end of this, they realize that we still have each other, and that's so much what matters. And so it's a really good opportunity for us to recall, like, I might not like my mom and dad, or they might have left me or whatever, but they're still mom and dad. So how can we make this the best family that we possibly can? It's not perfect, but it's still our family.
Yeah.
Despite what horrors you face.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even
It's
if they're
true,
not
though.
demonic horrors, they might be the IRS.
Right,
Or
right.
who
right.
knows what else.
It takes many forms, yeah.
Well, we certainly conjured up a good conversation tonight.
Funny.
All right, guys. Well, this has been.
Adam had some really good puns in
Yes.
this movie. I
Did
wish you...
Do you remember what they were?
No.
That's the crux of the problem. Like,
That's the problem is
We'll post them later
Mhm.
if we can
If we
think
think
of them.
of
So
acronym.
yeah. So for Cinema Rabbit Trails, episode 6. This is Jerry Andrew.
Adam Rice.
And David Leffler.
Have a good night, everybody.
See ya.